about to dive into a history that feels distant, but whose fingerprints are still all over modern society. We're talking about 358 years of African slavery in Brazil, a system that ran from 1530 all the way to 1888. It was just this continuous engine of institutionalized violence and dehumanization. And that number, 358 years, it's almost impossible to really hold in your head, isn't it? It just feels so abstract.
It does. And that feeling is, it's precisely the challenge here. Our brains aren't really wired to visualize periods that go so far beyond our own lives. When you have a historical trauma that lasts for more than 4 times a single human lifespan, we're talking about 14 generations, one after the other, the suffering, it risks getting minimized. It turns into this hazy footnote in a history book.
Just a line item.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we can't let it become abstract.
Well,
Our mission today is to try and break through that. We're going to use a really powerful tool to do it.
Yeah.
Comparative history. We're going to place this brutal Brazilian reality right next to what was happening in the rest of the world at the exact same time.
And that comparison really gets to the core thesis of our deep dive today. For 3.5 centuries, you had 2 completely different worlds coexisting on the very same timeline. While one world was racing towards modernity scientifically, politically, Brazil was deliberately held back, stuck, stagnant in a system of exploitation. Before we get to the comparisons, though, we have to talk about the scale of it all, because the numbers, they're just staggering. Our sources confirm that over this period, something like 4.8 million African people were forcibly taken to Brazil.
And that's more than any other single territory on the entire American continent.
It's just massive.
And you have to add the death toll before they even arrived. At
Yeah.
least 670,000 more people died during those horrific 35 to 60-day voyages on the slave ships.
So while that reality forced labor, violence, systemic abuse was the norm in Brazil, the rest of the world was in the middle of a knowledge explosion.
Oh, absolutely. You had the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the scientific and industrial revolutions.
The birth of democratic ideals.
All of it, flourishing across Europe and the United States. It's this profound paradox, really. A world of incredible intellectual and creative energy right alongside a world of complete social and political stagnation in the largest country in South America.
So that brings up a really important question, doesn't it? Was this just bad luck? Or was Brazil simply too isolated, too far away to know what was happening?
No. Absolutely not. And that's the common myth we really need to dismantle. The stagnation was not because of ignorance or isolation. Not at all.
Yeah.
The Brazilian colonial elite, the Portuguese colonizers, they were well-traveled, highly educated. They were fully aware of what was going on. They were reading the same books as the European elites.
So if they knew the world was changing, they chose to reject it.
Precisely. Maintaining slavery was a deliberate, conscious choice. It was a political and ideological decision made by the elite to preserve their own privileges, to guarantee free labor forever, and to generate massive wealth for a tiny few.
So this wasn't just a country lagging behind.
No, it was an active project of backwardness.
Yeah.
It was designed to maintain a system of racial and economic domination. They literally chose the past in the name of power.
That reframing that was an active choice against modernity makes the comparisons we're about to look at even more jarring.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's put the clocks next to each other and really see how vast this chasm is.
Yeah. Let's start way back in the late 17th century. The year is 1687. In England, Isaac Newton publishes his Principia Mathematica. He describes the universal law of gravity and, completely revolutionizes our understanding of the cosmos.
A foundational moment for all of modern science. So what was life like in Brazil that same year?
The country had no universities, no scientific centers, no infrastructure at all for higher learning. Instead, the central public fixtures were the pelourinhos, the public whipping posts. That's where enslaved people were routinely and brutally punished, as a tool of terror and control. Just think about that for a second. The difference in what those two societies valued. One is charting the laws of the universe, and the other is institutionalizing torture to maintain a labor system.
Yeah.
It's a moral and intellectual abyss.
It really is. Now, let's jump forward to the 19th century. It's 1818. European literature is pushing new boundaries. Mary Shelley publishes Frankenstein.
Which is widely considered the first work of science fiction, right? It reflects this incredible freedom of thought.
Exactly. And the rule regarding the mind in Brazil.
What was it?
Well, slavery was still legal, still brutally enforced, and it was explicitly illegal for black people, enslaved or free, to learn how to read or write.
Wow.
Knowledge was denied as a tool of oppression.
And just a few years later, in 1829, you have Louis Braille in France creating his reading system for the visually impaired. That juxtaposition is just devastating. One society is innovating access to knowledge, the other is actively criminalizing it for an entire race.
It shows two completely opposed views on human potential, and that pattern holds firm. Fast forward to 1859, Charles Darwin publishes The Origin of Species,
Shaking the foundations of biology and religion worldwide, ushering in modern evolutionary science.
And yet in Brazil, the year 1859 just meant that slavery was still the absolute backbone of the national economy. It sustained the massive coffee plantations. Free labor and elite wealth, that's what mattered. It trumped everything else.
You see the same deliberate choice in infrastructure, too, right? I mean, by 1863, London opens the Underground, the world's first subway system, a huge leap in modern urban planning.
Meanwhile, Brazil was still operating under a semi-feudal system. It lacked pretty much all basic urban infrastructure. No sanitation, no effective public services, because the elite were focused on rural, extractive wealth.
Generated by free labor.
Always. Even right up to the very end of the slavery era, the contrast is so sharp. So in 1885, Carl Benz develops the first gasoline-powered automobile. He's setting the stage for a global revolution in transportation.
And what was the great political innovation in Brazil in 1885?
The Lei do Sexagenário, the law of the sexagenarian. On paper, it granted freedom to enslaved people when they turned 60.
Wait, 60? That sounds like...
Well, given the brutal conditions and malnutrition, was anyone even surviving long enough to claim that freedom?
Very, very few. It was a completely cynical political move. It was meant to appease international abolitionist pressure without actually sacrificing the workforce. You grant freedom only to people whose labor value is gone and who probably won't live that long anyway. It was basically meaningless.
And the final contrast comes in 1888. George Eastman launches the Kodak camera. Photography becomes accessible to everyone. The world is looking forward, literally capturing its own image. And in Brazil.
Finally, the Lei Áurea, the Golden Law, is signed. Slavery is abolished.
Officially.
Officially. But that 358-year project of backwardness wasn't just about technology. It was deeply political and social. And that's where the legacy really starts to hurt. That's the essential pivot point, isn't it? This wasn't just about missing out on new inventions. It meant systematically denying all the necessary social infrastructure. No higher education, repressing any free press. Basically marginalizing anyone who wasn't part of the ruling white class.
Absolutely. It was designed to maintain a power vacuum. And because the goal was always to preserve power, the moment of abolition was handled with intentional neglect. The end of slavery in 1888 came with absolutely no policy of reparation, no social inclusion, not even a basic recognition of the centuries of forced unpaid labor that built the nation.
So the millions of people who had been enslaved or were their descendants were just abandoned.
They were left with no access to land, no education, which had been denied to them on purpose, and no pathway to dignified work. And what makes the next year, 1889, so critical is that the new republic actually reinforced this exclusion.
How did they do that? Did they just ignore them?
It was worse than ignoring them. The new republic's policy was to actively welcome huge waves of white European immigrants, Italians, Germans, Portuguese. They came with state-funded incentives and were given access to paid jobs, often in the very same coffee fields that were formerly run by enslaved black labor.
So they were actively turning their backs on the people who built the nation.
And prioritizing white immigration to, quote, whiten the nation and fill the labor void with people they considered more acceptable.
So that's it. That's the moment the historical backwardness transforms directly into modern structural racism. They didn't just fail to integrate the newly freed population, they actively implemented policies to substitute and exclude them.
Exactly. That historical choice is the root of the lingering effects we still see today. The legacy is visible in structural racism, which, often operates as this silent force of systemic exclusion.
And you can see it in the data.
Oh, clearly. Disproportionate poverty rates, shocking levels of police brutality and mass incarceration directed at the black population, limited access to higher education. Even today, representation in positions of power in politics, media, academia, it's still incredibly limited.
And yet, despite the undeniable contribution of African people to every part of Brazilian life, we come back to that initial problem. Historical erasure. Slavery is often taught as this distant, closed chapter, completely disconnected from today's problems.
And that disconnection is so damaging. It prevents the essential recognition of this history of suffering and resistance.
Yeah.
The African contribution to Brazilian culture is immense. Music, dance, food, language. But that celebration often happens without acknowledging the cost of that contribution. And that narrative choice, it hinders any real chance of confronting inequality today.
This deep dive has really laid it bare. Brazil's long reliance on slavery wasn't just some unfortunate practice that took too long to end. It was a conscious political project of backwardness, a continuous choice by the elite to reject progress in the name of power and privilege.
And that realization leads us to a final provocative thought we want to leave you with. The societal model fostered by those 358 years is not a historical relic. It's not locked away in a museum. It is a structure that remains deeply rooted in the collective imagination, influencing everything from urban planning to economic policy. Confronting this historical choice, this stark contrast with the rest of the world, isn't just about looking at the past. It's the essential, unavoidable step in understanding the profound inequality of today, and ultimately in building a truly just future.